this session. And so thanks to those who returned for coming back here. This session has been promised a lot in the past few sessions. It was many questions were diverted to saying, oh yeah, we'll talk about that. And so now you're going to get, hopefully, the answers that you've been waiting for some of these questions. We focus on two aspects of inequality in this session in reaching the SDGs. So the first half, we actually focus on income inequality and how to eradicate poverty under the sustainable development pathways and under the GDP trajectories that were developed for the sustainable development pathways. The second half will then broaden in basically towards multidimensional poverty and whether if the income side is met, whether actually also on aspects like access to energy, access to health, education, and decent living standards, actually that is likely to be met under these circumstances that are projected for the sustainable development pathways. So at first we go into income inequality, and there we have a presentation by my colleague Jihoon Min, who has developed Gini projections that eradicate poverty under the sustainable development pathways. And so let's start with that.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so in this presentation, I can present how we go about quantifying the income inequality reduction along the SDP scenarios. Okay, so based on this target-seeking idea of SDP scenarios, we wanted to find out a set of normative Gini trajectories that can achieve poverty eradication targets, basically meaning zero poverty head count. And this is, I have to clarify, this is a sort of theoretical derivation, and it's not considering various feasibility concerns, such as political or governance or like social acceptability kind of concerns. Is not considered in this work. And I should also say it's slightly diverging from the classical SDG 1, which is zero poverty target. And instead we are adopting SDG 1 is basically having a fixed international poverty line, which is around 1.9 according to the earlier quantification, $1.9 per day level. Instead of that, we are adopting country-specific poverty lines that's increasing as the national income grows. So it's more taking into account the country-specific context and the challenges as well. So talking about, again, about poverty lines. So on the left side is the classical World Bank classification of different income groups among different various countries, and also showing what national poverty lines they have in each country. And they have these 4 different income groups. And for the lowest income group on the left, bottom left side, they have this more standardized $1.9 per day international poverty line, what they call. And again, that's the SDG 1 target. But instead, we are on the right side, we have this linear fit trend line going through the same set of dots. Dots are basically countries. And the poverty target we are trying to get at is basically this yellow, orangey, pink type line. So we try to achieve that level for each country. And for the methodology, to start with, what we have done is to derive a closed form relationship between a minimum threshold poverty target, and income Gini, and average income per capita, whatever. And this derivation is independent of the base year distribution shape. So we don't have to assume like certain types like log normal, which is typically used in this distributional studies. And one key assumption I have to say is I'm assuming the distributional change in certain future is represented as what we call affine transformation. And it's quite simple. It's just if you have a baseline base year distribution, you can just stretch it or squeeze it based on a fixed scalar. And then you can also shift it up and down with a fixed amount. So as a visualization in this slide, let's assume you have this, again, orange line is the base year income distribution. And you want to bring that distribution above this vertical brownish line at $3.9 per day so that you can achieve zero poverty headcount. So basically you can shift this dash line to the right, and you can also squeeze it, stretch it so that you can have different shapes meeting the same poverty target, right? So that's the affine transformation I'm saying. And here are some math formulations I played with. Let me simplify for you. So you have income X at the base year, and certain point in the future, you will have your income, which can be KX plus D. But everyone else in the population has KX plus D income in the end. So that's what we call Z now. And you will have distribution of X and corresponding Gini for X distribution, and you have Gini corresponding to the distribution of Z for the future. And we found out at the end of this slide, these two Ginis can be related to this equation. So that's what we derived. And this relationship basically gives the target Gini trajectories that's achieving zero poverty headcount at the given poverty line I have shown above. And this formulation is just about the starting point and the end point. And we also have to say how we will connect these two starting and ending points. And that's in this slide. So our approach is to improve Gini as fast as possible. And it's not going all the way to zero. It's too unrealistic. So we basically look at this World Bank database called PovCalNet and look at the historical Gini observation over the last 40 years and try to extract how fast Gini can be reduced and how low can it go. So, and then we use different levels for different SDP scenarios. So in the table, for example, on the left side, for EI scenario, which is more market-driven and technology-driven scenario, we assume it will be a bit slower than other scenarios in terms of reducing Ginis because it's left to the market. And also, it cannot go as low as other scenarios. It's staying a little bit higher than others. So we also set different levels for MC and RC scenarios. And then the next slide. So we synthesize all these ideas above to plot these lines. So here it's showing the poverty line evolution, the dashed lines, 3 different colors for 3 different scenarios. So it's increasing over time. And then this is an example for Afghanistan. Yes, and Afghanistan had at the moment around $3.14 per day mean expenditure per capita. So it's very close to, the mean is very close to the international poverty line at 1.9. So if we want to achieve 0 poverty headcount as of now, it means the country has to be really equal. Yeah? And you can see the target Gini lines there. And it's showing about like 13, the Gini of 13 to achieve this 1.9 degree, $1.9 per day level. And the vertical, the horizontal dashed lines there show the historical minimum I have shown above in the table. That's around 20 something level. So we can see the target Gini is just too low, too much lower than the historical minimum Gini. So we assume we cannot get there. It's impossible. So what we can do in the end is these Gini trajectories. So the base year Gini for Afghanistan was around 33, according to the database. And you can follow this fast reduction speed, different speed for different scenarios. And then I can see, you can see the cursor, right? So it comes down and it reaches the historical minimum. But you can see it's still much higher than the target Gini. So what you can do is just wait until it meets the target Gini line. So it means for Afghanistan, for EI scenario, at this intersection at around 2075, Afghanistan EI scenario can achieve the 0 poverty target. Yeah? And for more positive scenarios, MCRCs, they can achieve the same absolute poverty target a bit earlier, right? 2050, 2060, around the level. So that's how we did it. So it's a quite straightforward application of these ideas. And on top of that, we can also apply SDG 10 sort of idea there. So we so far looked at just poverty eradication, but in terms of inequality, let's assume we want to reach an absolute Gini level of 30. It's a little bit stylized way, but this 30 number is based on Bjorn's calculation, which is based on log normal distribution. But let's say it can be different levels, but let's say 30 is for now the inequality target we have. So that means we might reach 0 poverty head count at certain Gini above 30, but we let Gini decrease further until it reaches the Gini of 30 level. So then we can say we try to look at this SDG 1 and SDG 10, both at the same time. So what we get in the end are these lines for all different countries. So here on the columns, you are seeing 3 different SDP scenarios. The rows, these are the income categories from World Banks. And each line is one country. And the asterisks here are showing at which time point they are achieving 0 poverty head count. The general pattern you're seeing here is that the low income countries at the top have later achievement, so the asterisks are on the more on the right side, while the high income countries are achieving it even earlier. Yeah. And I extracted these two countries for the ease of comparison. So there's Niger on the left, South Africa on the right. So Niger is in low income group. South Africa is upper middle income class. And Niger is more like Afghanistan case. So it comes all the way down to historical minimum, but it has to wait a couple decades until it really reaches the zero poverty headcount target. But South Africa, from the starting point, it's having very high inequality, while they have a bit higher income. So they can reduce the inequality a bit up to like 50 something level, and they can relatively easily achieve the absolute poverty target. But as I said above, it tries to reach the relative inequality target. So it comes down all the way to 30 and then it stops there. So that's where the relative inequality target is at. So yeah.
One more minute. Can you
okay. Yeah. I have two slides. So in this method, I can also identify there are some countries who cannot achieve this zero poverty headcount even by 2100. Basically, the growth is too little for these countries. So, but it's just based on my methodology. So it's not the end of the world, but this is what I can do. And the final slide, the final message I can get is, okay, based on the different starting points of these countries, they have very different levels of challenges. And even for the achievement time point, it can be decades different, right? It can be 2030 or 2070. So I would say the synchronous achievement as hoped in SDG will be very ambitious without unprecedented redistribution within or across countries. Yeah, thanks. Sorry, I have spent like 3 more minutes.
Thank you, Jihoon, for that explanation of how we dealt with income distribution and showing how strong of a redistribution is basically needed. As with the other sessions, we have asked one discussant to respond here first. If you stop sharing your screen, Jihoon, then we'll have Adrien Fabre from CNRS in France as first respondent here. And anyone else who has questions, please type those in the chat so we can pick those up.
Hi. Yes. Hi. Yeah, I'm here. So I think I won't share my screen. I haven't prepared slides. I just have notes. If you want to have the notes, I can share them just to support my. So let me first summarize the papers and the contribution. So the paper studies what combination of growth and redistribution can close the national poverty gaps. It assumes that the evolution of the income distribution follows an affine transformation, meaning a combination of each person getting an additional given amount. For example, each person earns $30 more, or each person's earning growing or shrinking by a given rate. So with this affine transformation, we can model the evolution of the income distribution from something less equal to something more equal, for example, by a raise in the additional amount for everyone and a shrinking in people's earning. So there are several contributions. The first is that it shows that modeling the evolution of distribution with this affine transformation actually provides a good fit. The second contribution is to derive a closed form relationship between the change in GDP, the change in Gini, and the parameters of the affine distribution transformation. The third contribution is taking a realistic GDP growth rate, estimate the change in Gini that is required to close the poverty gap. The fourth contribution does the reverse with realistic Gini changes, the speed of decrease in inequality that are realistic, estimate the GDP growth rate that would be required to close the poverty gap. And actually, the co-authors do both at the same time. They map the pairs of Gini and GDP changes that would close the poverty gap. Finally, they consider top to bottom redistribution, where I'm not sure I understood correctly, but I think all income above a certain threshold in the country is expropriated and redistributed to the poorest, and the threshold is chosen so that it closes the poverty gap. And the last contribution is to show that to close the poverty gap, the inequality has to decrease more through the affine transformation. So shrinking the income of everyone to finance the universal basic income. So inequality decreases more with that form of this redistribution than with the top to bottom redistribution. At least is what they find in Rwanda and India. So now my comments. I find the paper very interesting. It conducts a much needed analysis of the prospect to alleviate poverty and reduce inequality through growth and international redistribution. And it makes valuable contribution. On the critical side, I would say the presentation can be improved for better clarity. And now I have 3 questions. So the first is the clarification whether I correctly understood the top to bottom redistribution. The second is why do you assume a log normal distribution in the top to bottom case? Can't you do it non-parametrically? The second question is that I'm not sure that you're aware of the papers of Ravalion in 2010 in the Journal of Globalization and Development, and a more recent paper 2022 in World Development by Bolk, Seriani, and Lopez Calva. Because you don't cite them, but they are close to what you do. So the latter is more up to date, and it has a slightly different approach where instead of it's kind of in between the top to bottom and the affine transformation, they consider a linear marginal tax rate above a certain threshold and compute what tax rate would be required to close the poverty gap. And they test 2 different thresholds, the extreme poverty line, so $2 per day, and the American poverty line, so $13 per day. And they find that in 27 countries, including India and Rwanda, the 2 that you take as example in your paper, 27 countries do not have the internal resources to close the extreme poverty gap with redistribution alone. So growth would be required. And even if we take the higher threshold, and we are allowed to tax only those who are non-poor according to US standards, then 62 countries do not have the internal resources to close the poverty gap. So your findings—
One more minute.
Yes?
1 more minute.
Okay, so your finding, I'm much more optimistic because you find that it's possible to close the poverty gap internally in India and in Rwanda, and I'm wondering if it's just due to different data, in your case, WID instead of POVCALNet. And the last point is that despite these differences, your conclusions are basically the same. Low-income countries do not have the capacity to meet the Sustainable Development Goals and eradicate extreme poverty by themselves by 2030. So the only remaining solution is international transfers. And it connects to my own research that shows that the prospect for international transfers are not as grim as people think they are. I have surveyed representative samples of the population in 20 countries, and everywhere, more than 70% support a global tax on millionaires that would fund infrastructure and public services in low-income countries. And in every country, a majority supports a global cap and trade system on CO2 emission, redistributed as a global basic income. So taking together, our both papers show that the case is strong for international transfers. And I would rather frame the conclusion as the Sustainable Development Goals are our goals. So to meet them, we need international transfers, rather than to say Sustainable Development Goals are too ambitious if we don't have international transfers. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for those thoughts, Adrien. In the interest of time, I'm going to ask that any questions and also responses here